The year was 1945. The war in Europe was dying, but hatred wasn't. In the fading chill of April, Bavaria looked deceptively peaceful. Birch trees trembled under a pale sky, and the Danube ran silver between ruined bridges. American patrols moved carefully through the valleys, rifles slung low, boots sinking into thawed mud that still smelled faintly of gunpowder. To the men of Sergeant Frank Delaney's unit, peace felt like a rumor, something spoken of, never seen. Delaney walked ahead of his squad, his boots crunching over spent cartridges and wet leaves. He had the weathered face of a man who'd outlasted too many battles. Bastogne, the Ardennes, the slow bleed through Hurtgen Forest. The war had carved him quiet, but not cold. He led with a steadiness that steadied others. Behind him trudged a handful of soldiers, Corporal Haynes, young and wiry, whose laughter had been rationed to near extinction. Private Lenny McCall, the farm boy who still wrote to his mother every week, and two others whose names were already fading into the fog of exhaustion. They were following a narrow trail that twisted through the pine woods north of Regensburg, searching for pockets of German stragglers refusing to surrender. The air was damp and heavy with the scent of pine sap and wood smoke, signs of both forest and fire. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once and fell silent. Delaney raised his hand, and the men stopped. The forest had its own language, and just then, it was whispering wrong. Haynes saw it first. "Jesus," he murmured. Ahead, through the trees, something pale swayed gently in the breeze. It looked, at first, like a tattered flag or a length of cloth snagged on bark. But as they approached, rifles half raised, the shape resolved into something unmistakably human. Bound to a tree, wrists tied behind with wire, was a woman in a torn Luftwaffe auxiliary uniform. Her hair, once braided, now hung in a filthy tangle. Mud streaked her face, and her lips were split and bloodless. A wooden sign hung from her neck, the words crudely carved and blackened by soot. "German woman POWs don't forgive." For a long moment no one spoke. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. McCall muttered, "God Almighty? Who'd do that?" Delaney studied her, his jaw tight. Her chest rose faintly. She was alive, barely. Her eyes fluttered open, blue under a film of pain, and she tried to speak. No words came. "Cut her down," Delaney ordered. His voice was low, commanding, the kind men obeyed without thinking. Haynes hesitated. "Sir, she's German. She's human," Delaney snapped. They freed her carefully. The wire had bitten into her wrists, leaving deep red grooves. She sagged against Delaney's chest, so light he could have sworn she'd hollowed herself out to survive. When she finally whispered, her accent was thick, but her words were clear enough. "They were Germans. Not you. Germans." Delaney looked at the sign again. The irony hit him like cold rain. The enemy had turned on itself. They carried her to a nearby farmhouse the Germans had abandoned days earlier. Inside, the smell of burned rations and spilled lamp oil lingered. McCall set water to boil while Delaney examined her injuries. Bruised ribs, shallow cuts, dehydration. The woman flinched when anyone came near her boots. Delaney noticed the gesture but said nothing. When she regained some strength, Delaney knelt beside her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Greta," she whispered. "Greta Weiss." "Who did this to you, Greta?" Her eyes drifted toward the window, to the forest beyond. "My own. The ones who lost their souls before they lost the war." Later, as night folded around the farmhouse, the squad ate in silence. Haynes chewed on a piece of canned meat and said, "You sure she's not SS?" Delaney didn't look up. "Doesn't matter tonight." But it did matter, to the men, to their orders, to the blurred lines between mercy and caution. Rumors had spread among the Americans about female wolves, SS auxiliaries who'd shot surrendering troops or poisoned food stores. Every German woman in uniform carried that shadow. The narrator's voice, cool and factual, might have said, "By April 1945, the Wehrmacht had nearly collapsed, but vengeance survived in small, savage pockets." Women who had served as radio operators, nurses, or clerks were often branded collaborators, traitors, or worse. The sign around Greta's neck was both warning and confession, a message carved by men who couldn't stand the mirror of their defeat. As the wind pushed through the gaps in the boards, Delaney sat by the window, cleaning his rifle out of habit more than need. He could see Greta by the firelight, motionless, staring into nothing. She didn't cry. The silence around her felt older than the war itself. At midnight, thunder rolled faintly from the south. Greta stirred, murmuring in her sleep. Delaney caught fragments in German. They burned the station. Don't forgive. He realized she was dreaming of the place she'd been captured, perhaps by her own people. McCall whispered, "She's one of them, Sarge. What if they come looking for her?" Delaney glanced at the young soldier. "Then we'll be ready." Outside, the forest exhaled a long breath of rain and smoke. Somewhere far off, a gunshot echoed. A lonely sound, more execution than battle. In the early dawn, Delaney stepped out to scout the perimeter. Mist clung to the pines. The ground was scarred with old boot prints, German, recent. He crouched, running a finger over one of the prints. It led north, toward the ridgeline. He followed it a short distance until he found something half buried in mud. A metal insignia torn from a uniform, the twin lightning bolts of the SS. He pocketed it silently and returned. Inside, Greta sat awake, pale but alert. "You shouldn't be out there alone," she said softly. Delaney studied her, surprised by her steadiness. "You speak more English than you let on." She looked away. "I listened to your broadcasts before they destroyed our radios." There was a pause thick with the strange intimacy of war. Two enemies sharing a language not of words but of survival. Haynes entered, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "We moving out today, Sarge?" "Not yet," Delaney said. "We'll wait till she can walk." The men exchanged glances. Orders were orders, but compassion had no line in the manual. By noon, Greta could stand. She watched Delaney as he repaired a Jeep tire, her gaze steady, unreadable. Then, without prompting, she spoke. "The men who did this, they were SS deserters. They thought I betrayed them because I refused their orders. They left me as warning." Her voice trembled, but only once. "They said if any woman helped the enemy, she'd hang. I think they meant it." Delaney wiped his hands on his jacket. "You did the right thing." Her eyes hardened. "The right thing got others killed." The statement hung in the air like the smoke from their campfire, drifting, unresolved. As dusk fell again, the forest turned black and alive. The men took turns on watch. Greta sat near the doorway, her face flickering in lamplight. She looked fragile, but there was something in her stillness, something unbroken. Delaney watched her from across the room, wondering how many ghosts she carried. Then the sound came again, distant, but unmistakable gunfire. Not random, controlled bursts. Too close. The men froze. Haynes reached for his rifle. "That's not thunder anymore." Delaney stood, his silhouette framed by the firelight, and looked out into the darkness beyond the doorway. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke and iron. Greta whispered, barely audible, "They're coming back." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The forest outside crackled with unseen movement. Delaney's hand tightened around his rifle. He didn't speak, but his eyes said everything. The voice of the narrator would later say, "War teaches many things, chief among them, that mercy is never without cost." That night, in a Bavarian forest, an American sergeant learned that saving a life can summon every ghost that wanted it gone. And as the last embers of firelight dimmed against the window, the distant gunfire grew clearer, closer, until it sounded less like war, and more like revenge returning to finish what it started. Morning came gray and heavy, dragging mist across the pines like a shroud. The forest had gone quiet again, but the memory of last night's gunfire lingered in the minds of every man who'd heard it. Sergeant Frank Delaney stood outside the farmhouse, scanning the treeline with his field glasses. He saw no movement, only the thin columns of smoke rising in the distance where the SS deserters must have passed. The silence pressed against him like the weight of a secret. Inside, Greta Weiss sat by the fire, her wrists still raw beneath the fresh bandages. The light painted her face in fractured gold and shadow, and for a fleeting moment, she looked almost peaceful. But peace was a trick of flame and distance. Beneath her calm lay something taut and watchful. She noticed Delaney's reflection in the window and spoke without turning. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "Men like that never do. They need someone to pay for losing." Delaney entered, setting his rifle against the wall. "Let them come," he said. "We'll move out before dusk. Headquarters needs to know about those stragglers." Haynes looked up from cleaning his weapon. "What about her?" he asked, jerking his chin toward Greta. "She comes with us," Delaney replied. That answer stirred a ripple of unease across the room. McCall frowned. "You sure about that, Sarge?" "Word's out, some of those German women worked for the SS. Could be she's one of them." Delaney turned his gaze on him, steady and cold. "She's not." "Then how do you know?" Haynes said, his voice soft but insistent. "We don't. And if command finds out we're harboring a possible enemy operative, then I'll deal with it," Delaney interrupted. "You just keep your rifle pointed the right way." Greta's eyes moved from one soldier to another, reading their doubt like a language she'd learned long ago. "You think I'm a spy," she said. "That's all right. So did my own people." Her tone wasn't bitter. It was bone-tired, stripped of anything resembling pride. She rose slowly, walking toward the stove, where a dented kettle hissed faintly. "Do you know what they called us? Trümmerfrauen, rubble women. But I wasn't that yet. I worked radios, coded messages, coordinates, never touched a weapon. When they started shooting civilians, I refused to relay the orders." She paused, pouring the hot water into a tin cup. "That was my crime." The men exchanged glances. The word refused carried more gravity than confession. Delaney accepted the cup she offered him. Steam curled between them. "You'll be safer if you come with us," he said. Greta looked at him, really looked this time. "There is no safe," she said. "Not for the defeated." They left the farmhouse by noon. The roads were little more than veins of mud, littered with burned wagons and the pale bones of cattle. The rain came in brief, whispering showers that slicked the men's helmets and turned the forest floor to slurry. Greta walked beside Delaney, wearing a blanket over her shoulders, her uniform hidden but not forgotten. Every time they passed a German civilian, she turned her face away. At a checkpoint near a broken bridge, an American officer eyed the group suspiciously. "Who's the Fräulein?" he asked. "Civilian aid," Delaney answered quickly. The officer studied Greta's face. "Looks like she's seen hell." "She has," Delaney said, and motioned for his men to move on before any more questions could follow. When they reached a small barn outside Neustadt, they made camp for the night. The barn smelled of straw and rust. Greta helped McCall feed the mule they'd found tethered nearby, her movements quiet and efficient. For the first time, she seemed less like a ghost and more like someone remembering how to live. Haynes watched her from a corner. "You think she's playing us?" he murmured to Delaney. Delaney didn't answer. He was studying Greta too, but differently, like a puzzle that demanded the right kind of patience. He'd seen deceit before. It had a rhythm. Averted eyes, rehearsed sorrow. Greta's silence was too raw to be rehearsed. Later that evening, as rain pattered softly on the roof, Greta approached Delaney where he sat sharpening his knife by lantern light. "You lost men before?" she asked. He nodded. "Too many. They always say the dead are at peace," she said. "But I think the living envy them too much for that to be true." Delaney looked at her, not sure whether to agree or argue. "You talk like someone who's seen both sides." "I have," she said, "and neither forgives." She told him, haltingly, about her last post near Augsburg, how her commander ordered her unit to destroy evidence of mass graves, how she and 2 others refused. They were beaten, tied, and left for the retreating SS patrols to deal with. "They thought killing women would make them strong again," she said. "Men lose wars faster than they lose pride." Her words hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortably true. Delaney said nothing. He only closed the knife and set it aside. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant, like a memory repeating itself. By dawn, the squad was moving north. The roads were crowded now with refugees, gray-faced old men, mothers dragging children, soldiers stripped of insignia. The Americans offered food where they could. Greta gave her bread to a child with frostbitten fingers. The mother thanked her in German, and Greta flinched, as if the sound of her own language stung. When they stopped to rest, McCall whispered to Delaney, "Sarge, she's drawing attention. Locals don't like seeing her with us." "I noticed," Delaney said. "They're spitting when we pass, calling her a collaborator." Delaney glanced at Greta, who sat apart on a fallen log, her eyes fixed on the treeline. "She's already paid for that," he said. But he knew the danger wasn't over. Not from the civilians, and not from the SS remnants hunting the same roads. The men avoided meeting Greta's eyes now. She was becoming a burden they couldn't understand, a living question mark in a world that wanted easy answers. That evening they reached another ruined hamlet. Smoke drifted from chimneys, but the air carried the bitter tang of fear. In the square stood 3 bodies hanging from a beam, their boots missing. A wooden sign nailed beside them read, in rough German, "For betraying the fatherland." Greta stopped walking. Her face went ashen. "They're close," she whispered. Delaney scanned the bodies. 2 were men. One, a woman, still wore part of a Luftwaffe skirt, the same insignia Greta had once worn. McCall muttered, "Holy hell, they're hunting their own." Delaney's jaw tightened. "We move. Now." They retreated into the forest before nightfall, setting up a small perimeter near an abandoned sawmill. The men were silent, the horror still clinging to their clothes like ash. Greta sat beside the water trough, staring into her reflection. "It never ends," she said softly. Delaney crouched beside her. "It can, if someone stops them." She turned to him, eyes blazing now, not with fear, but something sharper. "You don't understand. These aren't soldiers anymore. They're wolves with faces of men. And they won't stop until the last woman who defied them is dead." Her voice trembled, not from weakness but from the awful certainty of memory. Delaney realized she wasn't speaking abstractly. She meant Keller and his men, the deserters she'd mentioned before. "How many?" he asked. 5, maybe 6, led by one who smiles while he kills. Delaney met her gaze. "Then we'll find them first." Greta shook her head. "You shouldn't have saved me, Sergeant. They'll come for you now, too." Delaney almost smiled. A tired, humorless thing. "They can try." For a long moment, they stared at each other, the silence between them filled with rain and the faint creak of trees. Something unspoken shifted, respect, perhaps, or recognition of shared defiance. Then a faint light flickered in the distance. Too steady for lightning, too deliberate for campfire. Haynes whispered, "Movement. Ridge to the east." Delaney's hand went to his rifle. "Positions," he said calmly. The men obeyed, spreading into the shadows. Greta's eyes stayed on that light. Her voice was barely a breath. "That's him." Delaney turned sharply. "Who?" "Keller," she said. "The man who wrote the sign." The mist thickened around them, the forest swallowing sound. For the first time since they'd met her, Greta looked neither haunted nor afraid. She looked ready, and as the pale flame on the ridge danced like a signal through the trees, Delaney understood that mercy had turned into something else entirely, something that would soon demand blood for balance. The forest had turned into a cathedral of ghosts. Mist coiled around the trunks like incense, and the cold breathed against their necks as if the world itself were holding its breath. Sergeant Frank Delaney led his men in silence, the mud sucking at their boots, rifles drawn but not raised. Every few yards, he lifted a hand to halt them, scanning the undergrowth where sound died too easily. Behind him, Greta Weiss moved with eerie steadiness, the folds of her blanket trailing like the remnants of a vanished flag. She had stopped trembling. Something had hardened in her overnight, something sharp enough to cut through fear. The faint glow they'd seen on the ridge the night before was gone now, but the tracks were fresh. Deep boot prints, small group formation, 6 men, maybe 7. Delaney crouched and touched the soil, still damp. They camped here, he murmured. Didn't stay long. Greta knelt beside him, studying the prints. They're splitting up, she said. Keller's men always move in pairs. He never trusts anyone behind him. Her voice was clinical, not emotional. She spoke as if she were reciting a field report from a life she'd already buried. Delaney glanced at her. You know their habits? I knew their commander, she replied. He believed in control through fear, even among his own. She paused. He used to joke that no one could hide from his sense of smell. Like a wolf. Delaney straightened. Then we'll make sure the wolf doesn't scent us first. They pushed deeper into the forest, weaving between shattered trunks where artillery shells had split the bark years earlier. The fog thickened until visibility was no more than 20 feet. The woods had a memory of violence that clung to everything: old shell fragments, spent casings, half-buried helmets. Even the birds avoided it. By midday, the air had turned bitter. McCall's breath came out in soft clouds as he whispered, "Feels like we're hunting ghosts, Sarge." Delaney replied without turning. "Ghosts bleed the same as men." Greta said nothing. She walked a few paces behind him, eyes fixed ahead, her hands tucked beneath the blanket. In the silence, her mind returned again and again to the tree, the bark against her skin, the weight of that sign. Don't forgive. The words had branded her more deeply than the rope burns. Forgiveness was for the dead. They found the first sign of the deserters near a creek. A charred mess tin still warm to the touch. The ashes hadn't cooled. Delaney gestured for the squad to fan out. They crouched low in the reeds, listening. The forest answered with nothing but the slow drip of water and the whisper of wind through pine needles. Then, faintly, from up the hill, a cough. Human. Delaney motioned, and they advanced in a slow arc. Greta followed, her boots barely touching the ground. The closer they came, the more the air smelled of smoke and wet leather. When they finally saw the source, it wasn't a camp. It was a trap. A body hung from a tree. A German deserter, his throat slit. A sign pinned to his chest read, "For weakness." Greta stopped dead. "Keller did this," she whispered. "He kills his own if they hesitate." Haynes scanned the surroundings. "Means he's close, right?" Delaney's reply was grim. "Closer than we want him to be." The sound came next, a twig snapping, deliberate and sharp. Then another to the left. Haynes turned, rifle up. A burst of gunfire tore through the fog, shredding bark above their heads. The squad dove for cover as bullets thudded into the trees. Delaney returned fire, short controlled bursts, the muzzle flash cutting quick frames into the haze. "Two shooters," McCall shouted. "Flank right," Delaney ordered. Greta dropped flat, covering her head as the forest erupted. The fight was close, chaotic, without the clean lines of battle. Just fragments of men and noise and movement. Within minutes, the gunfire thinned, then stopped altogether. When the smoke cleared, 2 bodies lay near the creek. One American, Haynes, his chest still. The other, a young German with the same insignia Greta once wore. Keller's men had left him behind like waste. Delaney crouched beside the body, his jaw rigid. "They're testing us," he muttered, "drawing us in one shot at a time." Greta stood nearby, her face unreadable. "That's Keller," she said. "He doesn't fight battles, he orchestrates them." Delaney looked up at her. "You knew this could happen." "I warned you," she said. Her voice wavered, but her eyes didn't. The rain started again, soft at first, then heavier. It drummed on the canopy like distant artillery. Delaney covered Haynes's body with his coat, then turned to the others. "We finished this." McCall swallowed hard. "Sarge, we're 5 left. You sure this is worth dying for?" Delaney's eyes shifted toward Greta. "Ask her." Greta met McCall's stare. "They won't stop with me," she said quietly. "They'll keep hunting. Every woman who said no. Every soldier who put down his rifle. If you walk away now, they'll find another to hang." McCall said nothing more. They moved again before sunset, following Keller's trail through the ridgeline. The forest opened into an abandoned logging road. Half-rotted stumps jutted from the earth like broken teeth. Greta pointed to faint tire tracks half-swallowed by mud. "He's heading toward the river," she said. "There's a crossing old military ferry, used before the retreat." Delaney nodded. "Then that's where we end it." As night fell, the forest became a black ocean. Their flashlights were kept low, their breathing slow. Somewhere ahead, faint laughter echoed. A cruel, jagged sound. Greta froze. "That's him." They crept closer until the firelight appeared, orange and flickering through the mist. Around it, 4 men sat, their rifles leaning against a log. One of them, tall with cropped blonde hair, polished a pistol and smiled as he spoke in low German. Keller. Even from the shadows, his arrogance was a flame unto itself. Delaney whispered, "We wait for my signal." But Greta didn't wait. She rose from the darkness like something reborn in vengeance. Delaney reached for her, but she was already moving, stepping into the edge of the firelight. The men froze. Keller's eyes widened, then curved into a grin. "Well," he said in German, voice dripping with disbelief, "the ghost returns." Greta stood perfectly still, the fire reflecting in her eyes. "You left me to die." Keller laughed, a dry rasp. "You were already dead. I just gave the forest a reminder." Delaney emerged behind her, rifle trained. "Drop it," he barked. The deserters spun, reaching for weapons, but McCall and the others were faster. A burst of fire cracked through the clearing. 2 men fell instantly. Keller dove behind the log, returning shots wildly. Greta dropped to one knee, clutching a pistol she'd taken from the fallen German. She aimed, but her hand shook. Keller's bullet tore through a branch above her, showering splinters into her hair. Delaney moved between them, firing once. The bullet struck Keller's shoulder, spinning him to the ground. He screamed, half rage, half disbelief. Delaney approached slowly, gun steady. "Don't," Greta said behind him. Her voice was low, trembling with something deeper than fear. Delaney hesitated, glancing back. She stepped forward, her face streaked with dirt and rain. "He's mine." Keller looked up at her through blood and rain, still smiling faintly. "What will you do, Fräulein? Forgive me?" Greta raised the pistol, her eyes hollow of mercy. "No," she said. "Remember." The shot was muffled by the storm. Keller fell sideways, the smile still frozen on his face. No one spoke. The rain hissed over the fire, dimming it to embers. Greta lowered the pistol slowly, her shoulders trembling now. Not from weakness, but release. Delaney approached, placing a hand on her arm. "It's done." She looked at him as though she didn't understand the word. "No," she whispered. "It never is." They gathered what little supplies remained and buried Haynes near the creek at dawn. Greta knelt at the grave, her hands clasped around the spent casing from her bullet. When she rose, her face was pale but steady. McCall looked to Delaney. "What now?" Delaney watched the fog lift over the trees, the first hint of sunlight catching the dew. "We go back," he said. But Greta didn't move. Her gaze lingered toward the river, where Keller's body lay half-submerged. "I thought killing him would make it stop," she murmured. "It only made the silence louder." Delaney didn't answer. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out the SS insignia he'd found days before, and dropped it into the water. It sank without a ripple. The narrator's voice might have said, "In war, vengeance is never clean. It clings like smoke to those who breathe it." By morning, the forest was quiet again. But quiet does not mean peace. As they turned to leave, a single distant sound echoed through the valley, the low, rhythmic rumble of engines. Not German, American, reinforcements moving closer. Delaney glanced at Greta. "Time to go." She looked back once more toward the river, her expression unreadable. "Yes," she said softly, "before the next ghosts arrive." Smoke still lingered in the trees when dawn came. It drifted through the pines like the ghost of the fire that had burned out the night before, wrapping the forest in a silence too complete to trust. Sergeant Frank Delaney sat by the dying embers of their campfire, staring into the ashes. Around him, the forest had stopped echoing with gunfire. Only the river's slow murmur remained, steady and indifferent, as if nothing human had ever happened here. Greta Weiss sat a few yards away, knees drawn to her chest, her hair wet and clinging to her face. Her eyes were open but distant. She hadn't spoken since Keller fell. The pistol still hung from her hand, its metal cold against her skin. She looked like a statue of defiance carved from exhaustion. Delaney rose slowly, his movements heavy with the kind of fatigue that lived deeper than muscle. "We'll move out soon," he said quietly. "Head west. There's a Red Cross station at Straubing. They'll take you in." Greta didn't respond. Her gaze was fixed on the river, where Keller's body had disappeared hours ago. She said finally, "You think it ends when you walk away, but it doesn't. The war follows you, even when it's dead." Delaney understood more than he wanted to. He'd killed men whose faces still woke him at night, men who looked as young and lost as McCall did now, sitting on a log behind them cleaning his rifle like it mattered. "You did what you had to," Delaney said. Her voice came soft but edged. "That's what he said too." The words cut deeper than accusation. They were truth wrapped in fatigue. Delaney turned away, staring toward the treeline. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell was ringing. It was faint, cracked, the kind of sound that had no congregation left to answer it. By midday, they reached the outskirts of a ruined village. The road was lined with burned wagons and the skeletons of houses. A few villagers watched from doorways, hollow-eyed and silent. One old woman spat in Greta's direction. Greta didn't flinch. Delaney moved closer, his presence enough to quiet the stares. Mercy had no allies in these places. They found shelter in what had once been a schoolhouse. The chalkboard still bore the faint scrawl of a lesson about geography, the world as it existed before it collapsed. Delaney leaned his rifle by the door and took stock of supplies. "We'll rest here tonight," he said. McCall was quiet. "What happens after Straubing, Sarge? You think they'll really take her?" "They'll have to," Delaney said. "War's over for her." But he didn't believe it. Neither did Greta. She walked slowly around the classroom, touching the dusty desks, the broken maps. "They taught us once that Germany was eternal," she murmured. "Then they taught us how to destroy to prove it." She turned to Delaney. "What do you teach your soldiers?" Delaney thought about it. "How to survive," he said. "Though I don't know if that's worth learning anymore." A brief silence passed. The wind pressed against the windows. Greta set down the pistol and sat across from him. "Why did you save me?" she asked. "Because you were dying." "That's not a reason," she said. "That's an instinct." Delaney's expression hardened. "Maybe that's all mercy ever is." Her lips curved into something almost like a smile, bitter, fleeting. "Then mercy is a dangerous instinct." The door creaked. McCall entered, eyes wide. "Sarge, jeeps coming up the road. American markings." Delaney grabbed his rifle and stepped outside. 3 olive-drab vehicles rolled toward them through the mist. The lead jeep stopped, and an officer stepped out, his uniform clean and his face sharp as polished glass. "Major Harrison, Military Intelligence." "Sergeant Delaney," Harrison said. "Been looking for you. You're 2 days off your patrol route." "Got delayed," Delaney replied evenly. "Found something that needed handling." Harrison's gaze flicked past him to Greta standing in the doorway. His tone shifted. "That her?" Delaney said nothing. Harrison walked closer, studying her like an exhibit. "Luftwaffe auxiliary by the look of it. Word is some of them were SS informants. We're collecting all personnel like that for questioning." Greta's jaw tightened. "I told you, I wasn't SS." "Maybe," Harrison said, "but that's not my call." Delaney stepped forward, his stance deliberate. "She's not what you think. She helped us take out a rogue SS unit. She deserves protection, not a cage." Harrison's expression didn't change. You don't decide that, Sergeant. Orders are orders. Delaney felt the pulse in his neck tighten. Orders change. Humanity doesn't. For the first time, Harrison's mask cracked. Slightly. You think this war runs on humanity? You've been in it too long. He motioned to his men. Take her. Two soldiers moved toward Greta. She didn't resist. She stood straight, her eyes fixed on Delaney. It's all right, she said softly. You did enough. Delaney's fists clenched. He wanted to speak, to argue, to pull rank, to do anything but watch history repeat itself. But Greta shook her head almost imperceptibly. A silent command. Don't. The men led her to the jeep. Harrison turned back once more. You'll get commendation for this, Sergeant. Bringing in a live witness will look good in the report. Delaney said nothing. When the engine started, the village filled with the low hum of machinery, war's last language. Greta looked back only once, her face calm, almost serene. In that instant, Delaney saw the full weight of what she carried. Not vengeance, not guilt. Something deeper. The burden of being remembered by those who'd prefer to forget. Then the convoy disappeared beyond the ridge, swallowed by dust and sunlight. McCall came beside him. We just let her go? Delaney didn't answer. He stood motionless, staring down the empty road. In his pocket, he still carried the bullet casing from Keller's gun, the one Greta had fired. He turned it between his fingers, feeling the faint grooves where the metal had cooled. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. You ever notice how mercy always costs the ones who give it? McCall frowned. Thought mercy was supposed to make things right. Delaney looked toward the forest, where smoke still rose in thin, ghostly strands. No, he said. Mercy doesn't make things right. It just keeps the world from getting worse. The wind stirred the ashes at his feet, lifting them into the sunlight. For a moment, they glittered like snowfall. Somewhere beyond the trees, the church bell rang again. Clearer this time, as if the forest itself had forgiven nothing but remembered everything. Delaney turned toward his men. Let's move out. As they walked away from the empty schoolhouse, the faint echo of the bell followed them, mingling with the sound of boots on broken ground. And in that fragile moment between war and peace, the world seemed to whisper its oldest truth, that mercy, once given, burns longer than fire.